My entire piece turned green.
Oh.
Oh, are we back?
Yeah, looks like it.
My entire PC, all 3 screens just went green, and the PC rebooted. And then Windows decided to go, "Hey, you're
Let's do an
updating
update.
now."
Yep.
Oh, that's the worst. It's just like,
Windows
oh,
updates.
gotcha now, sucker.
He just asked Jeff. I was messaging him in Discord. I'm like, "Hey, damn it, move faster, PC, no."
So
The updates will get you.
Sometimes I think the Windows PCs will crash if you wait too long to update them, just because they know they're like, well, we'll just crash and we'll start updating, and they'll think it was an oops.
Those bastards.
It looks like you're doing something important. It'd be a real shame if I updated right now.
There it is. So George put a nice little joke in the chat right before we came back, which pops up on the screen there now too. And yeah, I kind of like that one. All right, so if we can dive back into where we were, Brian, are you able to recreate the masterpiece that was being said as we went down?
Yeah. So as I was saying, something that I try to remember when a player at the table is showing like they don't appear into it or they appear frustrated at the table is that there is a good possibility that it is not something at the table that is the main cause. Especially like even if you're playing weekly, the majority of their life is not spent at the table. So, it can be a variety of things. There could be issues like you could have had a really bad day at work. You could be having a stressful situation at home. You could have a flat tire that you got on the way home. And like any of that can like be enough to push somebody over the edge and just make them just a little snappy. So that's something that I always try to remember. I have a player that when we're playing, if they think they're coming off as too snappy, will contact me after the session and say, "Hey, I wanted to apologize. I'm sure that I came off as really confrontational, but I had a really rough day at work." And I'm like, "No, you were fine."
Yeah.
He's like, "Well, I thought we were arguing," and I was like, "No, we were just talking about horse mechanics."
I mean, that sounds like
an
argument.
Yeah,
that's a way to derail a session.
So I'm going to take what we've been talking about here and kind of tie it back into what we started talking about too, is a lot of what we mentioned specifically was like some, D&D mechanics or things in other games. These things still apply to these rules light story driven games as well, because with fewer rules, you might have someone disagree with how you interpret something, or, because there's a lot of open endedness to it. So these sort of things can happen in those games as well. And honestly, it gives you a little bit more leeway to be like, yeah, that's fine. Especially if you're like practicing these, doing these one shots or these mini campaigns with these. It's not going to destroy the table or break the game sometimes to concede. Especially on something minor that's not going to break the game. Sometimes it's better to be like, okay, yeah, this time, we'll let that work that way. Then you can address it outside if it's something you think they're going to try again you disagree with. But sometimes it's just let that go, or be like, okay, so how do you see this working? Like in these story driven games or this creativity is improv, like have them explain like how their character's doing it and why it's working, because then you're still playing the game.
Yep.
That's one of the reasons I love. Oh, sorry.
No, yeah, go for it.
I was just gonna say that's one of the reasons I love these like narrative driven rules like games, is just for that exact reason. What would be in a crunchier system the challenge or the argument or the disagreement now is just a conversation that is part of the rules of the game and how it works. It's just figuring out what that is, what it looks like, how it feels, what you do, and going from there, because in so many of these games, what the role is or whatever the mechanic would be behind it is so bare bones that you're just putting out the story and the narrative and the descriptor, and that's just how that works, and that's all you need.
I know some of the games that Dawn and I have streamed here, we've made a little bit, like, the rules were vague, and so we added a little bit. We mentioned that, like, one of the things that we've done is like a yes and, or a succeed at a cost type thing, because there's some games we've played, like Roll for Shoes, the Grand Pug Adventure, where if you have contested rolls, but it doesn't tell you what happens if you tie.
Yep.
Right.
So we went with succeed, but a cost, or something else happens.
Succeed, but you might get what you wanted, but not exactly what you expected.
Yeah, and that's what's going to happen in a lot of these rules light games, because they're trying to make it, like for that Grand Pug Adventure one we did, it was specifically a one-page RPG.
Yep.
So you can't really put a lot of rules and a lot of crunch and a lot of, like, oh, if this situation happens, do this, because you've got a limited number of pages. There's a lot of one-page RPG. I don't know if they're necessarily competitions, but things out there where you submit to those,
like jams.
Yeah, jams. There we go. And so you've got limited space to do, or they got to keep it to 2 pages. You cannot put every single circumstance or everything in that.
Nope.
And so there's a lot of openness to the rules in these games, and that is open for interpretation. And it's okay to make those calls on the fly and be like, you know what? Because I think we did that in all these games. It didn't say what to do if this happened, so here's what we're gonna do.
Yep. And we're all like, yeah, sounds good, let's do it, and just dive in.
And so for those of you listening that are players or are a GM or whatever, getting a chance to play, think about this from the side of the player. How can you help the person running the game a little bit too? Like, if you disagree, is it something you can bring up after the session? Like, is it a minor thing that you disagree on, but it's not going to, like, change the whole outcome of the campaign, that you can bring up to them and talk to them later? They will appreciate that, and they will dive into it with you, I'm sure.
Yep. After the session, ask instead of accuse. Just ask questions.
Yeah.
Yep.
Be like, hey, I didn't understand this. What did you mean by this rule?
That hits on a good thing right there, is that we're not assuming malice, we're assuming miscommunication here. And that's what's happening 9 times out of 10. So if you approach it from this didn't make sense to me, what were you trying to do by this? The way that you did it, this is what it represented to me, instead of, why did you do this? Why this is not how you should have done this at all.
What's your takeaway from how you understood this?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, really, when it comes down to it, like Brian said, 90% of all conflict comes from a miscommunication or a misalignment of ideas.
Yep.
Like, 2 people think 2 completely different things are occurring at the same time. And
or they've misinterpreted a sentence.
Yeah,
or not
exactly.
They've interpreted something 2 different ways because of their life experiences.
Yeah, exactly. And it's going to happen. But it's important to make sure you ask clarifying questions, because that helps.
So the other thing I was going to touch on earlier is Jesse mentioned the initial question, and Jesse, thanks for asking, and thanks for the feedback about how you feel better and the answers helped you, because now we know we weren't just rambling on for nothing.
Just barking at the screen, just
But you mentioned an initial question about losing immersion, and sometimes we mentioned, like, taking a pause from the game. So something that's not really talked about a lot, and this is probably the last thing, not the nuclear option, but this is something that's probably going to be our last topic for the evening that we really kind of touch on. It still ties into this overall GM tips for these story-driven games and just in general. But when you have that immersion-breaking moment in a game, or you're in a tense situation or something, or like a combat or something that is time crunch and you have to take a break, or you break the immersion, getting that back afterwards.
Yep.
So one thing I've seen, and I've done this before too, and I've seen it, and it seems to work really well, is when you're coming back, maybe it's a break between sessions is all, because you can use that here too. But if you've had this conflict or something in the middle because of a rules disagreement or whatnot, building the scene, bringing the immersion back, ask the players, what their character feels like in this moment, even if it's not their turn. Ask them what their character's thinking about right now, and then you're having the players are then getting into the mindset of their characters again, and that is building the immersion and bringing them back into the moment, back into the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would punctuate that by doing a something happens.
Well, you can't always do if something happens though in a situation though. I see where you're going with that, and
Yeah, you
it can also
can.
help. You're in the middle of somebody's turn in combat,
Orcs attack.
so you're gonna add more. You're gonna add more combat to
Orcs
the combat.
attack.
No, I'm gonna change the environment.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
come on, give me some more.
Floor is now lava.
Well, no, like if you're fighting orcs in the middle of combat, all of a sudden the ground starts to break apart, and this massive sinkhole that's formed by a, I don't know, let's say, football field sized geode that is finally shattered from the resonance of the combat starts causing the ground to break away, and it's razor sharp down there. That makes things all of a sudden really interesting.
Mm-hmm. So I was going for is like give an example, kind of show what you got here. But keep rolling. Didn't you ever take the video classes?
I can throw a lot of something happens and stuff. The problem is that sometimes I add too many layers, and the players are like, I don't even know what's real right now.
Chem test does happen sometimes. Yeah. Any other tips, Brian or Lion? That rhymes. Any other tips for like helping bring the immersion back? Whether it's a break in game between sessions, or just like a really tense moment, or maybe even like a real emotional moment, and just kind of trying to lighten the mood a little bit too.
Slap them with a fish.
I think my advice is not going to be the best. My first piece of advice was going to be that something happens. But
every time the guest star and
so
Dawn.
Good.
The guest star and Dawn every time.
But one of the other things I find is just check your notes. This again kind of falls into the something happens, but check your notes. Look for something that they care about, or are interested in, or are intrigued by. And that's a really good way to pull them back in and help them get back into that mindset. Give them things, situations, threads that they care about and will be invested in. And if you're in those really tense moments and those really like powerful emotional moments, it's something you kind of have to gauge, right? You have to decide how much of the tension do you want to break, and what route you want to take to get there. Because you could have something like lighthearted and like silly happen sometimes. There's nothing wrong with that. Some people I know will present issues with that, but I personally feel there's nothing wrong with creating those funny moments to break up the heaviness. You can also go in other directions and be like, what can I bring into the scene, the scenery, or into people they interact with, that will allow for them to engage in a different like medium, that will let them be less emotionally exhausted, angry, tired, sad, just burnt out, by creating a beautiful sunset, or an opportunity for like a thunderstorm that they can have their cool, very tropey in the rain moments in, or an NPC that they like to make fun of the name of. So we got to bring it back around at some point. But it's just about trying to be aware of ways you can shift things in the setting or situation to provide that option. And if they don't want it, they won't take it, and that's fine. You'll learn something from that too, and know that they want to keep exploring these feelings and these emotions.
Oh yeah.
But if they do take it, you now have another way that they will potentially latch onto for when you need to break those tensions or pull immersion back in.
I'm gonna say one that Brian will probably like. Absolutely, you can contrast things, especially if you're into like the darkness or the horror, with something of beauty, like that's just a quick or a close cut. Like one of the ones that I really liked that I read in Ravenloft was cutting to like a moonlight blooming flower that's occurring in the middle of like this really somber moment. It just kind of brings that hope and the beauty back into it.
Yeah, that's
The heavy
nail on the
contrast.
head. And that's especially useful if you're running horror centric stuff because, most people do not want horror 24/7. Most people do not want to live in a constant state of fear, anxiety, and depression.
Yep.
But if you're a horror centric DM, you might like that. That might be where you're happiest. You might really enjoy just constant horror all the time. And just providing those moments. Yeah.
Both of you.
Yeah. That's whenever I let myself just freeform create, people will look at my stuff and go, so when does it get upbeat? When does it? And I'm like, no, that's
the high
happy
point.
end.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's the high point.
I had that before where my players finish something and they're like, wow, we really screwed that up. I was like, no, that was the good ending. And they're like, what?
See,
yeah,
Jesse's lyrics there, that was what he used to say at the beginning of all my big campaign that I ran for about a year. Gloom and doom and death and despair.
But providing that little reprieve from the dark, from the horror, from the terror, whatever you have going on, it's a good palate cleanser. And it just reminds you that you're especially if you're playing something like D&D where it's power fantasy, you are heroes. It kind of reminds the players that you are heroes. In horror, it might be a little bit harder to see that, but end of the day, you're trying to kick the teeth in of darkness.
Yep. And in a lot of those horror, there is that moment of reprise or that beauty and hope. And that's what causes those characters to rally and keep facing what they're dealing with. Because even if the players are heavy into it, the characters themselves need those reprise, reprieves where they're just need that rest, that safe haven for even if it's just a minute.
Horror, in my opinion, horror is always best as highs and lows.
Yep.
Right. Because and not enough of either or too much of either will create that issue of it becomes boring. It becomes less immersive. It becomes less engaging if it's always like this on either side of the spectrum. And being able to prime your players, prime the characters, set them up for something, and then either you hit them with it or you don't, and you keep that tension building over time, or you have had that tension building, and then you just let a little bit of the tension trail away from something softer and calmer and kinder. You will also find that you get much better results and reactions as you go because you are able to just sort of create that flow where it's not too much of anything at once.
Yeah, and you can take that same kind of thing and bring it into battles as well. Like,
oh yeah,
if it's an extremely like war-torn moment and you're coming back into the game, you can have something where there's a a skald or somebody who's singing in it. You just frame the moment of them carrying the banner and blaring out this music while they're across the field. You can really bring that beauty and almost a tranquility in the middle of the combat, and then have it tick all back up to full speed and do kind of a time dilation effect there for a moment. There's so much text.
I was giving a few seconds for the chain there, see if it came back. Yeah, we've hit on a lot of good stuff, and I'll reiterate that we mentioned a lot of specifics of like D&D or things like that, but this still applies to these rules light story driven games in all those aspects. Whether they're less likely to happen, there's still things that might happen, and a lot of it boils down to communication. We haven't said that in a while, Don. That used to be like central to everything. Yeah, it used to be central to every stream, everything we did, every podcast. Communicate.
So important.
That's what it boils down to, is like, communicating, trying to take your emotions out of it as someone running the game, because if you can keep yourself and your emotions in check a little bit, even if inside you're just, if outwardly you can kind of keep that in check, that's going to keep the situation from escalating. And if you can just take a breath, take a beat, and try and ask clarifying questions or communicate, that can resolve a situation before it gets to a point of the nuclear option or things getting out of hand.
Yeah. And what I meant by the nuclear option is sometimes you have to sacrifice the campaign you've been working on the altar of friendship.
Yeah.
Where something happened in that game that caused a fight, and you literally just have to burn that campaign down because it's not something anybody wants to go back to.
Yep. And you have to accept. Yeah, I was going to say.
I think we're
you
going to
have
say the same thing.
It can be really hard to accept, especially if it's something that you've put a lot of time and energy and just emotion into, because it feels like you're killing your darling.
Yep.
And
it's your baby.
You have to do that. Yeah, you have to do it sometimes.
Yep. And you just have to put it away and wait for a different group.
Yeah.
Don't throw it away, but put it away and wait for a different group.
This just brought to mind, and this is also because this was referenced last week in something else, but there's that little Pixar short called Bow, I think it is.
Oh, I love that one.
Sometimes you feel like you're destroying your baby.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, that was such a good short.
Horrifying. But not what I expected. I first saw that one. I think when it first came out, I was in a theater watching something that was on there. It's just like,
I forget what it was. It was
did that just happen?
Yeah, it was such powerful imagery. Really.
It was really well written. It was just surprising and a little bit horrifying, but the imagery and how it was done was extremely well.
Yeah, don't eat your players. We're not advocating for that.
No. You can have something eat their characters, but don't eat your players.
And if you need to for some reason, you can eat their character sheet, I guess. But that's where we draw the line.
If you're really committed to the bit, I guess, yeah.
Sometimes you really got to break the fourth wall. You just walk over and you're like, and I destroy your max HP. And then you never get invited over again.
I was gonna say, I want to hear about.
But they'll never
forget it. There's gonna be a horror story of some point or a horror game, and Brian's just gonna be like, you know what? And he's gonna go over and he's gonna grab the sheet.
So, one of these times, I want to run Fate of Cthulhu with having it to where, like, if they get like their whatever roll it is, the weird roll or whatever, maxed out, it's like you actually zoom out and get true insight that you are a character on a sheet.
Yes.
Oh,
I did that in an Eberron game I had, where they one of the main bad guys, they're aberrations, but they can kind of warp reality, and somebody gave me the idea to like allow them to break the fourth wall. So like it was the end of the campaign, or it was the end of the big story arc, and they came to fight this aberration, and it started addressing the players.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And you just have a moment where you're like, wait, what? That's you mean my character's name, right? And I'm like, no.
Nope.
No, he's
it's like
just
a moment
talking to you
from the never-ending story. It's only a story. It's not real.
Yeah, I once had a situation where a character slowly descended into madness. It was in I want to say a 3-5 game, because I'm old. But they slowly descended into madness after pissing off a fae, and the fae leaned in and whispered to them, "You're not real." And then they could hear the dice rolls.
Oh.
And it
that's beautiful.
That's gorgeous.
Man, that player, they took it and they ran with it so well. And just watching them, the character just slowly break down, trying to figure out what that even meant and what is going. It was so good.
Oh, that's when you get the chance to run that kind of weird stuff, and you have a player that's like, yes, let's do this. I have so many ideas. It's so good.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
If you hadn't put a kibosh on the character and the craziness, Don, I feel like you could have done that to Captain Fitz.
Yeah, you're not
wrong.
wrong.
The only time I've ever seen Don in any game throughout history say no
Yeah.
And
'Cause
you know what?
usually
I
I'm
will-
like, yeah, go for it. Why not?
whatever. I was gonna say let's end the stream first, but whatever. I'm just gonna go into it because
Yep,
usually
do
I'm
it.
like, let's save these stories for later. But
Do
we
it.
have a lot of those built up. So I
Story
had
time.
this. We had 3 friends playing, and we were playing Brothers from Another Mother. So we had a human, a half elf, and an elf.
Yep.
I was playing the half elf, who was also slightly insane because of all of this, and so he was Captain Fitz von Tarlenheim of His Highness's Royal Navy. Could not tell you who His Highness was or where the Royal Navy was because there was no water around. And he ended up somehow by chance getting a sentient weapon that spoke to him.
Oh yeah, it was glorious.
But the weapon didn't speak out loud where other people heard it, but he responded to the weapon out loud. So when the weapon would talk to him in his head, he would respond out loud.
Oh yeah.
So I think the person playing the elf was also a magic user. So like, hey, can I cast Magic Mouth on his helmet and permanency it? And Don was like, no,
Nope.
too much. No.
Nope. Too much.
Amazing.
Yeah, that one spun out of control pretty quick. But it was
Well, I
great.
mean,
It was a fun one.
I don't remember who our third person was, but I know it was me and Jake. I don't remember who the third person was. Was it Fritz? No, it wasn't Fritz.
Mm-mm.
Anyway, whatever. Now loop us back in. All right. Any kind of final thoughts on any tips or anything for these rules light, improv, creative games, or bringing like the immersion was the last thing we were kind of hitting on to. Anything else for any of those?
Don't write too much before you play.
Yep.
With story-driven games, it is a collaborative storytelling experience more so than anything crunchy.
Yeah.
If you write everything up beforehand, you will find that the game is incredibly boring. If not for you, then definitely for your players.
Yep.
Follow your players, hear what they want, find ways to make that the focus and make it interesting, work with them. Never feel like you can't turn to them and ask them to present what they want to see here, what they want to do somewhere. Don't write too much.
Yeah. Use them. Use your players as a soundboard. It'll help.
And like in those situations too, like that, like ask them, what are you looking for? What are you trying to do? Bring them in because there's also going to be players that are uncomfortable in these games and situations.
Yeah.
Like,
Especially if they're new to them.
Yeah, we focused on like GM this entire time, but players are going to be excited to try these, but it still brings them outside their comfort zone. So prompt them.
Yep. I was going to say one last tip. Draw your players out of analysis paralysis.
Yes.
Be their sounding board too. When they're like, I'm not sure what to do. I'm like, well, what's your character want to do? Who are they? What would their motivation be? At this current point in time, what are they feeling? Okay, let's act on that.
Sometimes impulse is the way to go sometimes.
Yep. It'll cause something to happen.
May not be the best option, but it'll get the action moving. It'll get things going.
It'll be memorable.
Yep.
Any last words, Brian?
Remember it's a game, and remember why you're playing the game. You're there to have fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly. You're there to have fun. You're there to have a good time. You're not doing it as your job. You're not doing it on a stream, probably. Just have fun. Crying is a free action.
But if you sob violently, it takes a full action.
Yep. Yep. It really does. At least a full action.
I think Jesse distracted me. I had something in there. Oh no,
Jesse's real good at that.
It's back. My last note I'm gonna say before we do some sign-offs here is also like in that session 0, decide what type of game you're running too, and that can really help creativity. Is this a silly game? Is this a horror game? Is this a fantasy game? Is this like with our Brains and Brawn game? We were spies, like super spies, but we were like the comedy super spies.
Yep, theme and tone are really important.
There we go. That's also important. Theme and tone. Figure out, is this a serious game? Is this a funny game? Is this, the dark? All that. Like, figure that out, and that's also going to help the players as well as yourself guide the choices, because when you get to like, okay, what happens here? Okay, this is a silly game. Something funny is going to happen.
Yep.
This is a dark game. Something serious is going to happen. Those sort of things narrow down your analysis paralysis as well,
Yeah.
because you have a direction you can go.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Before we sign off, then we're going to go in reverse order this time and start with Lion. Tell them kind of who you are, where to find you, and one more little dig for the promo for the charity.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, I'm Lion. I'm the head for Tales from the Table Studios. You can find me there on Twitch. You can find us on YouTube as well, and you can find me on Twitter at the Lion Knight 42. We run a bunch of different APs and create other content that allows for platforming of amazing creators and wonderful people within the community to tell their stories and present their games in a way that is palatable and enjoyable for you. We are going to be running March 24th through the 26th, the Days of Tales 2 charity drive supporting NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. If you are interested in being a part of it, our casting calls are still open until Monday. We're looking for people doing everything. And if you're not interested in being a part of it that way, you can still come over to our Twitch on the 24th through the 26th. Check those out. Throw some donations our way. Just be hyped in the chat and enjoy some fantastic games, panels, and more.
Heck yeah. Sounds awesome.
Awesome. Yeah, follow that out, and we'll also kind of show some updates as we see them. We'll make sure we share them on Twitter and whatnot, and Don and I will be checking our schedules to see what March 24th through 26th looks like for us.
I will check and see what I'm capable of doing.
I'd love to have y'all.
Well, NAMI is really awesome, so I'm really glad that it's near and dear to my heart in many ways. Jeff could definitely attest to that.
Oh yeah. And Brian.
So once again, I am Brian, aka Bjark the Bard. I write over at bjarkthebard.com, cover just about everything. The two books that I have out currently is the older one is Nocturnes and Nightmares. So if you want a little bit of horror, as I've mentioned, I am a bit of a horror GM myself. It's a great place to get a little bit there, but really what I'm talking about right now is the only heist book that came out officially this month. I don't know about the other one, Beyond the Golden Vault. Because why would you stop at just the Golden Vault? You should really go beyond it. Yes. Give you everything you need to run heists, crimes, and capers at your D&D 5e table.
Heck yeah.
All right. Last thing I'm going to throw in here is I'm going to throw in a plug for the cooperative content conversations. We released, I think, about a week ago, the second article on that, this one focusing on world building. So I dropped a link once again in the chat for that. It's hosted on Brian's blog because we didn't want to go through and have to create our own yet before we got this rolling. So the very first one was on Summon and Pets, and yes, for those of you wondering or keeping track, Don got his time to shine.
I did a good job. I may have opinions, but I did a good job.
Yes.
I enjoyed that one a lot.
So we started with Summons and Pets. This one's on world building. We are currently, I just started putting the word out. We're going to do the next one on NPCs.
That'll be a fun one.
So if anybody's interested in writing about NPCs for it, you can join the Cove Discord or reach out to us, and we can help you submit for that. Once we get all of the submissions for ideas, then we kind of take what's there and decide as we start to get more submissions. We are probably going to, if someone's done before, we're going to be like, this is a great idea, but sorry. Because we're wanting to get just as many voices in as we can.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, check those out. Also, read the old ones, leave us comments, give us your thoughts and opinions, or give us ideas for topics that you might want to hear about. It's a group of GMs that do all sorts of games and systems, just kind of bringing the tools and their ideas together and sharing their knowledge with the masses.
Anything we can do to help make this space better. and help
Yeah.
others, because that's what it's about. None
Heck
of
yeah.
us, none of our creators, none of the people that work on this stuff could do it on their own. And we really
yeah.
like to help that community where we can.
Mhm.
At least I think so, right?
Yeah, that's where we're going. That's where we're going. Okay. Brian dropped the Cove Discord link in the chat as well. So if you're watching on YouTube, pause it and like write it down maybe, because you probably can't click on that link if you're watching on YouTube for the VOD. But
You put
You
it in
know.
you put it in the
oh
description,
yeah,
right?
yeah, that's
Yep.
true.
That
Yeah.
will be part of the great editing.
I know. I'll figure out how to do like some of this stuff on the back end to help you out, Don, like adding descriptions and whatnot. We'll work
Yeah,
on that.
if you can do that once I get it all organized, that would be amazing.
Yeah, that's my forte anyway. So, but anyways, thanks Lion, thanks Brian for joining us again as always. This has been a lot of fun.
Lion, do you want to post any links in the chat, because it's been scrolling a bit?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, yeah, absolutely.
And it also stopped and disconnected, so we might have lost them.
Oh yeah, that's true. All right. Well,
Yeah.
So yeah,
thanks.
a few links in the chat that Lion's going to drop. So check those out. Thanks for joining us. It's been a lot of fun. We're just glad to have you on, and
Yeah, absolutely. This has been a blast.
we continue
Yeah.
this trend of Don dropping something that the guest star is just like, yeah, I was gonna mention that. That's awesome.
I'm sorry.
Don't
I'm so
apologize.
sorry.
Don't apologize. I just want to see if I can keep this trend going now. This just makes me want to get more guest stars to keep going, because this is interesting to me. I mean, this is how it started with Brian. We just did our podcast and we were just talking.
Yep, for sure.
This evolved. So,
I deeply appreciate y'all having me on, by the way. This has been absolutely phenomenal.
Thanks. Yeah, we just try to keep it chill and talk about fun stuff.
Heck yeah.
But for everyone listening, thanks for joining us. If you were watching, I guess, too, either way, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Yep. Stay legendary, folks. Ah! There you go, George.
You preempted your sign-off line.
Yep. Peace.